A woman who had once been the brightest part of his life lay bleeding on a deserted mountain road, unable to speak a single word. Her expensive engagement ring had been ripped from her finger, bruises darkened her arms, and her terrified eyes followed every passing headlight with desperate hope. Nobody stopped. Nobody wanted trouble. Then a convoy of black armored SUVs sliced through the storm, their headlights illuminating the broken figure sprawled across the asphalt. The man sitting inside the lead vehicle glanced through the rain-soaked window, and the world he had buried 5 years ago came crashing back with one whispered name. Elena. 5 years earlier, Elena Hart had walked away from Damien Moretti without asking for money, protection, or forgiveness. She had simply disappeared after discovering that loving the future head of the Moretti syndicate meant living with blood on every tomorrow. She had believed leaving him would save them both. Instead, it had condemned her to a quieter kind of suffering. Elena had built a modest life in another city, becoming one of the country's most respected forensic accountants. She was curvy, confident in quiet ways, and carried herself with the grace of someone who had learned that kindness required far more courage than cruelty. Clients trusted her because she could uncover financial lies hidden beneath layers of polished numbers. Criminals feared her because she could expose them without raising her voice. She never imagined that accepting a corporate fraud investigation would destroy everything. The company she investigated belonged to Victor Kane, a celebrated businessman whose charitable image concealed an empire of money laundering, political bribery, and human trafficking. Elena discovered encrypted financial trails connecting dozens of shell corporations to offshore accounts. Before she could deliver the evidence to federal investigators, Victor's men intercepted her. They demanded the files. She refused. They demanded passwords. She stayed silent. When threats failed, humiliation followed. One of the men laughed as he shoved her into the mud. "Look at you," he sneered. "You really believed someone like you could bring powerful men down?" Another grabbed her laptop and smashed it beneath his boot. "Nobody is coming for you." Elena swallowed the pain burning inside her ribs. They could destroy her work. They could break her phone. They could even break her bones. But they would never make her betray innocent people whose lives depended on those records. Without warning, headlights appeared beyond the rain. Victor's men panicked. "Move." 3 armored SUVs approached with impossible speed. The first vehicle didn't slow down. It rammed directly into the attacker's truck, sending it spinning across the wet highway. Doors exploded open. Men dressed in black tactical suits surrounded the road with frightening precision. Within seconds, every weapon pointed toward Victor's crew. Silence replaced the storm. One pair of polished Italian shoes stepped onto the soaked pavement. Damien Moretti had changed. At 38, he looked even more intimidating than the man Elena remembered. Tailored charcoal overcoat. Black gloves. Calm gray eyes completely devoid of panic despite bullets lying scattered across the road. Every armed guard instinctively lowered his head as he walked past them. His gaze never left Elena. She tried to speak. Nothing came. Only silence. One of Damien's captains approached. "Boss, she can't talk." Damien crouched before her. Rain dripped from his hair as he gently lifted her chin. His expression remained unreadable, but his voice softened almost imperceptibly. "Who did this?" Elena's lips trembled. No answer. She couldn't force out a single sound. Victor's surviving men suddenly opened fire. Gunshots shattered the night. Damien shielded Elena with his own body while his security detail answered with disciplined bursts that ended the attack almost instantly. When the smoke cleared, Victor's men had vanished into the forest. Damien stood. "They weren't trying to kill her," he said quietly. His captain frowned. "No. They wanted her terrified." His eyes narrowed toward the darkness. "That means they'll come back." He removed his coat and wrapped it carefully around Elena's shoulders. She looked up at him with tears threatening to fall. 5 years had passed. Not once had she expected to see him again. Not like this. His convoy carried her to Moretti Estate, a sprawling fortress overlooking the sea where marble halls, priceless artwork and relentless security created a kingdom few outsiders had ever entered. Doctors rushed toward her. Damien raised one hand. "Everyone leaves." They obeyed instantly. The enormous room became silent. He placed a glass of water before her. Then slid a blank sheet of paper across the table. "If you want my protection," he said evenly, "write the truth." Elena's injured fingers wrapped around the pen. Slowly, painfully she wrote only 6 words. "They weren't looking for me. They were looking for you." Damien read the sentence once. Then again. For the first time in years, Genuine surprise crossed the face of the most feared mafia boss in Europe. Instead of sending her away, he folded the paper, locked the study doors himself, and looked directly into her frightened eyes. "You don't leave this house," he said. "From this moment on, you stay." The first sunrise over Moretti estate arrived wrapped in gold, casting warm light across marble floors that had witnessed decades of whispered alliances and deadly decisions. Elena stood near the enormous kitchen window with a cup of untouched tea in her hands. Her throat still refused to produce more than a strained whisper, yet the silence no longer felt like weakness. It had become her armor. Around her, the estate awakened with military precision. Security teams rotated shifts. Luxury sedans glided through the gates. Chefs prepared breakfast worthy of royalty while analysts filled conference rooms overlooking the Mediterranean. Every person seemed to move according to Damien Moretti's invisible command. Everyone except Elena. She thanked the housekeeper with a grateful smile and quietly insisted on carrying her own breakfast tray. It was a small gesture, but one that caught Damien's attention from the balcony above. Most guests tried to impress him with charm or fear. Elena asked for nothing. Later that morning, Damien entered the library where she had been reviewing newspapers, financial magazines, and public corporate filings. Thick folders covered the table. He folded his arms. "You've barely recovered." She met his gaze and finally managed a raspy sentence. "Sitting still won't keep anyone alive." His expression remained unreadable, though something softened behind his eyes. "You still work before you heal." "I heal by working." A faint corner of his mouth lifted. The closest thing Damien Moretti ever gave to a smile. Over the following days, an unusual routine formed between them. Every morning they shared breakfast in silence. Every afternoon Damien disappeared into meetings with politicians, shipping executives, and syndicate captains while Elena quietly organized scattered financial reports his accountants considered complete. Every evening they crossed paths in the estate gardens overlooking the sea. Neither spoke much. Neither needed to. Respect grew where old heartbreak once lived. The household noticed. So did Damien's inner circle. At the weekly financial briefing, Elena entered only to return a misplaced folder. Conversations immediately stopped. One senior accountant smirked. The guest wandered into the wrong room. Another chuckled. "Maybe she wants decorating advice. These numbers aren't exactly cafe menus." Several men laughed. Elena simply placed the folder on the conference table. One spreadsheet remained open. Without asking permission, she reached for a marker. She circled 6 overseas transactions. Then another 11. Finally she underlined a single company name. Damien watched without interruption. The chief accountant frowned. "Those are audited." Elena slowly turned the page. She wrote instead of speaking. 3 companies share identical invoice timing. She flipped another document. Identical shipping insurance. Another page. Identical directors using different passports. Silence spread across the room. She wrote one final sentence. "Someone is laundering money through your own shipping network." Every executive stared at Damien. His chief accountant quickly opened encrypted records. Minutes later his face lost all color. "Boss." He swallowed. "She's right." Another analyst confirmed it. Then another. More than $80 million had vanished through transactions everyone else had approved. Damien looked toward Elena. "You found that in 2 days?" She nodded. One captain muttered under his breath. "Impossible." Damien answered before Elena could. "No." His calm voice silenced everyone. "Exceptional." From that moment, every person in the room looked at her differently. Not as Damien's former lover. Not as a frightened guest. But as someone whose mind could protect an empire. That evening Damien invited her onto the western terrace where the sea stretched endlessly beneath a crimson sunset. A velvet box rested beside 2 untouched glasses of wine. Elena hesitated. "I don't need gifts." "You misunderstand." He opened the box. Inside lay a handcrafted fountain pen forged from black titanium and white gold. The woman who uncovers lies deserves better than disposable pens. She gently ran her fingers across the elegant instrument. It wasn't extravagant for the sake of luxury. It respected her profession. She looked at him. "You remembered." "I remember everything." The words lingered between them long after the breeze carried away the silence. For the first time since arriving, Elena smiled without forcing herself. It reached her eyes. Damien found himself staring longer than he intended. She had always believed she needed to become smaller to fit into other people's expectations. Standing beside him beneath the fading sunlight, She looked radiant exactly as she was. "You've spent years letting the world convince you to hide," he said quietly. She lowered her eyes. "I got tired of apologizing for existing. You never owed anyone an apology." She looked back at him. "You are brilliant, strong, beautiful. Don't let anyone, including yourself, forget that." Emotion tightened her throat more than the injuries ever had. Before she could answer, Damien's phone vibrated. His expression hardened instantly. One encrypted message. Warehouse 12 breached. Within minutes, armored vehicles sped toward the city's industrial district. Elena insisted on accompanying the convoy despite protests from the security team. Inside Warehouse 12, scattered documents covered the concrete floor. Several encrypted hard drives had disappeared. No signs of forced entry. Too clean. Too careful. Damien slowly surveyed the room. This wasn't robbery. "No," Elena whispered. She walked toward a discarded invoice lying beneath a steel shelf. Something felt wrong. The page number read 38. The next recovered document began at 40. She searched again. Missing pages. Deliberately removed. She examined nearby security logs and suddenly froze. One employee identification number appeared twice at different entry points only 3 minutes apart. Impossible. Unless someone had duplicated the credentials. She hurried to Damien. "Someone inside your organization copied security access." His captains immediately reached for their weapons. "A traitor," Damien said. At that exact moment, every light inside the warehouse shut off. Darkness swallowed the building. Emergency alarms screamed. Outside, engines roared to life. Gunfire echoed across the docks. Then Elena noticed something that chilled her far more than the bullets. A tiny red laser rested perfectly still on the warehouse window. Not aimed at Damien. Aimed directly at her. Someone had been watching them long before tonight. And whoever waited beyond the darkness had no intention of missing a second time. The first shot shattered the warehouse window before anyone could react. Glass exploded across the concrete floor as security officers instinctively formed a protective circle around Damien. Red emergency lights flickered through the darkness, casting long shadows that made every corner look alive. "Move," Damien ordered. Another volley of gunfire erupted from the loading docks. The attackers had planned every second. They weren't firing wildly. They were driving everyone toward the rear exit. Toward a trap. Elena's pulse thundered in her ears. She stayed low behind a steel container, forcing herself to think instead of panic. Fear had nearly destroyed her once. She refused to let it decide her future. 2 masked men burst through a side entrance. One grabbed her arm. "There she is." Before he could pull her away, Damien crossed the distance with astonishing speed. He drove the attacker backward, wrenching Elena free and placing himself between her and the gunfire. "Stay behind me," he said. She wanted to argue. Instead, she nodded. Another explosion shook the warehouse. Smoke billowed from a stack of shipping containers, cutting visibility almost to nothing. Through the haze, Elena noticed something strange. The attackers ignored valuable cargo. Ignored Damien's closest advisors. Every movement revolved around one objective. They were hunting documents, not people. Her mind raced through the financial records she had examined during the past week. Warehouse 12? Duplicated access cards? Missing invoice pages? Then it clicked. "They're looking for the shipment registry," she called, her recovering voice rough but clear enough to hear. Damien turned instantly. "What?" "The registry links the shell companies. If they destroy it, every financial trail disappears." His eyes narrowed. "Where?" She pointed toward the secure archive office at the end of the warehouse. 3 armed attackers were already forcing the reinforced door. "They know exactly where to go." Damien immediately redirected his security team. "Protect the archive." The change in strategy caught the attackers off guard. A fierce exchange of gunfire erupted through the narrow corridor. One security officer stumbled after being struck in the shoulder. Another became trapped behind overturned shelving as flames from the earlier blast spread across the floor. Elena ignored shouted warnings and sprinted toward the archive office. "Elena!" Damien shouted. She reached the security terminal beside the vault door. The electronic display flashed an error. Multiple remote access attempts. Someone inside the organization had programmed the system to erase every encrypted record if the vault remained open for another 60 seconds. Years of forensic accounting had taught her that financial systems always left traces. She rapidly disabled the automated deletion sequence, identified the duplicate administrator credentials, and isolated the malicious command before the countdown reached 0. The monitors went dark. Then restarted. Archive secured. Damien stared at the screen. You stopped it? She nodded, breathing hard. They weren't stealing evidence. They were erasing it. Without those records, investigators would never have uncovered the network hidden behind legitimate corporations. The attackers realized they had failed. A sharp whistle echoed through the warehouse. Retreat. As several of them fled toward waiting vehicles, one remained hidden on an overhead walkway. He raised a suppressed rifle. The barrel pointed directly at Elena. Damien saw it a heartbeat before she did. He threw himself toward her. The shot rang out. Pain tore through his shoulder as the bullet struck him instead. They crashed onto the concrete together. For one terrifying second Elena forgot how to breathe. Blood spread across Damien's white shirt. No. His security team finally eliminated the threat, and silence returned as quickly as the violence had begun. Paramedics rushed inside. Damien refused the stretcher until he knew Elena was unharmed. Only after she nodded did he allow them to examine him. Hours later, the private medical wing inside Moretti Estate was quiet except for the steady rhythm of cardiac monitors. Damien sat on the edge of the bed despite repeated instructions to rest. Elena entered carrying a folder containing copies of the recovered financial evidence. You should be sleeping, she said softly. I wanted to thank the woman who saved more lives than she'll ever know. She lowered her eyes. I only followed the numbers. You followed the truth. He reached into the bedside drawer and placed a small velvet case in her hands. Inside rested a delicate platinum bracelet engraved with a single phrase. Never shrink yourself. Tears blurred her vision. It's too much. No. His voice was gentle. It's a reminder. She looked at him. You've spent years believing the world needed a smaller version of you. He met her gaze without hesitation. I don't. The room fell silent. For the first time since they had reunited, Elena allowed herself to believe that the man before her was no longer only the feared figure the world whispered about. He was also the young man who had once seen her worth before she could see it herself. She stepped closer. So you really trust me now? Damien smiled faintly despite the pain in his shoulder. With my life. Their eyes held each other for a long moment, the distance between them shrinking until the air itself seemed to tremble with unspoken emotion. Then a security officer burst into the room, his face drained of color. Boss. He placed a photograph on the bedside table. It showed Elena entering the estate that very first night. Someone had taken it from inside the mansion. Scrawled across the bottom in black ink were 6 chilling words. She's already dead. She just doesn't know it. The photograph changed everything. Someone inside Moretti Estate had watched Elena from the moment she arrived. Every smile from the staff, every polite greeting, every reassuring promise suddenly carried the possibility of deception. Damien doubled the estate's security overnight, but he trusted fewer people than ever. 3 days later, despite the growing danger, he refused to cancel the annual Moretti Foundation charity gala. Publicly, it funded children's hospitals and emergency trauma centers. Privately, it was the one evening when politicians, investors, diplomats, and corporate leaders gathered beneath one roof, making it the safest place to observe allies and enemies alike. You don't have to attend, Damien told Elena as designers adjusted the hem of her midnight blue gown. She met his eyes in the mirror. If someone is hunting me, hiding won't stop them. A flicker of admiration crossed his face. No, he admitted. It never would. The ballroom glittered beneath crystal chandeliers. A string quartet played softly while guests drifted between marble columns, speaking in carefully measured voices. When Elena entered beside Damien, conversations slowed. Several executives recognized her immediately. So that's the accountant. The guest who found the missing money? I expected someone different. Their eyes lingered on her curvy figure before settling on her calm expression. Elena had spent years shrinking beneath those looks. Tonight she simply smiled. One influential banker approached with a polite but dismissive laugh. Miss Hart, forensic accounting sounds fascinating. Though I imagine these financial discussions become rather technical. Instead of taking offense, Elena accepted his tablet. May I? He nodded confidently. Within seconds she reviewed the projected merger displayed on the screen. You've overvalued the shipping division by 12%. The banker frowned. Impossible. She highlighted several depreciation assumptions and adjusted 2 exchange rate projections. The projected profit instantly dropped by nearly $60 million. Silence spread across the table. His financial advisors recalculated. After several tense moments, one quietly whispered, "She's correct." Respect replaced amusement. Across the room Damien watched without interrupting. One of his senior advisors leaned closer. "She embarrassed 3 of the best analysts in Europe." Damien never looked away from Elena. "No," he replied evenly. "They embarrassed themselves." Later that evening, Damien invited Elena to stand beside him during a private strategy meeting attended by influential business partners and trusted advisors. Only months earlier, many of them would never have imagined an outsider entering such a room. Now Damien pulled out the chair beside his own. "Sit here." Several faces revealed open surprise. One executive objected. "Boss, with respect, internal strategy should remain." Damien's gaze silenced him before the sentence finished. "If Elena stays, the meeting continues." No one argued again. His security team finally eliminated the threat, and silence returned as quickly as the violence had begun. Paramedics rushed inside. Damien refused the stretcher until he knew Elena was unharmed. Only after she nodded did he allow them to examine him. Hours later, the private medical wing inside Moretti estate was quiet except for the steady rhythm of cardiac monitors. Damien sat on the edge of the bed despite repeated instructions to rest. Elena entered carrying a folder containing copies of the recovered financial evidence. "You should be sleeping," she said softly. "I wanted to thank the woman who saved more lives than she'll ever know." She lowered her eyes. "I only followed the numbers. You followed the truth." He reached into the bedside drawer and placed a small velvet case in her hands. Inside rested a delicate platinum bracelet engraved with a single phrase. "Never shrink yourself." Tears blurred her vision. "It's too much." "No." His voice was gentle. "It's a reminder." She looked at him. "You've spent years believing the world needed a smaller version of you." He met her gaze without hesitation. "I don't." The room fell silent. For the first time since they had reunited, Elena allowed herself to believe that the man before her was no longer only the feared figure the world whispered about. He was also the young man who had once seen her worth before she could see it herself. She stepped closer. "So you really trust me now?" Damien smiled faintly despite the pain in his shoulder. "With my life." Their eyes held each other for a long moment, the distance between them shrinking until the air itself seemed to tremble with unspoken emotion. Then a security officer burst into the room, his face drained of color. "Boss." He placed a photograph on the bedside table. It showed Elena entering the estate that very first night. Someone had taken it from inside the mansion. Scrawled across the bottom in black ink were 6 chilling words. "She's already dead. She just doesn't know it." The photograph changed everything. Someone inside Moretti estate had watched Elena from the moment she arrived. Every smile from the staff, every polite greeting, every reassuring promise suddenly carried the possibility of deception. Damien doubled the estate's security overnight, but he trusted fewer people than ever. 3 days later, despite the growing danger, he refused to cancel the annual Moretti Foundation charity gala. Publicly, it funded children's hospitals and emergency trauma centers. Privately, it was the one evening when politicians, investors, diplomats, and corporate leaders gathered beneath one roof, making it the safest place to observe allies and enemies alike. "You don't have to attend," Damien told Elena as designers adjusted the hem of her midnight blue gown. She met his eyes in the mirror. "If someone is hunting me, hiding won't stop them." A flicker of admiration crossed his face. "No," he admitted. "It never would." The ballroom glittered beneath crystal chandeliers. A string quartet played softly while guests drifted between marble columns, speaking in carefully measured voices. When Elena entered beside Damien, conversations slowed. Several executives recognized her immediately. "So that's the accountant. The guest who found the missing money? I expected someone different." Their eyes lingered on her curvy figure before settling on her calm expression. Elena had spent years shrinking beneath those looks. Tonight she simply smiled. One influential banker approached with a polite but dismissive laugh. "Miss Hart, forensic accounting sounds fascinating. Though I imagine these financial discussions become rather technical." Instead of taking offense, Elena accepted his tablet. "May I?" He nodded confidently. Within seconds she reviewed the projected merger displayed on the screen. "You've overvalued the shipping division by 12%. The banker frowned. "Impossible." She highlighted several depreciation assumptions and adjusted 2 exchange rate projections. The projected profit instantly dropped by nearly $60 million. Silence spread across the table. His financial advisors recalculated. After several tense moments, one quietly whispered, "She's correct." Respect replaced amusement. Across the room Damien watched without interrupting. One of his senior advisors leaned closer. "She embarrassed 3 of the best analysts in Europe." Damien never looked away from Elena. "No," he replied evenly. "They embarrassed themselves." Later that evening, Damien invited Elena to stand beside him during a private strategy meeting attended by influential business partners and trusted advisors. Only months earlier, many of them would never have imagined an outsider entering such a room. Now Damien pulled out the chair beside his own. "Sit here." Several faces revealed open surprise. One executive objected. "Boss, with respect, internal strategy should remain." Damien's gaze silenced him before the sentence finished. "If Elena stays, the meeting continues." No one argued again. As discussions unfolded, Elena quietly noticed inconsistencies between insurance contracts, shipping schedules, and warehouse maintenance reports. She requested copies. Within minutes she uncovered a disturbing pattern. 3 separate logistics companies had deliberately delayed humanitarian medical shipments while rerouting high-value cargo through identical ports. Someone wasn't merely stealing money anymore. They were manipulating supply chains to create shortages that would inflate black market prices. She slid the documents toward Damien. "This isn't random." He scanned the reports. "No," she continued. "Someone expects a crisis." Before anyone could respond, Damien's longtime operations director, Marco Bellini, abruptly stood. "I've seen enough." Every eye turned toward him. Marco had served Damien's family for nearly 20 years. He had attended Damien's father's funeral. He knew every warehouse, every contract, every employee. He also knew every weakness. Security guards stepped forward. Marco smiled. "You still don't understand." He pressed a hidden switch beneath the conference table. The ballroom lights died. Explosions thundered outside. Guests screamed. Emergency alarms echoed through the mansion. Smoke poured into the corridors. "It was you," Damien said quietly. Marco laughed. "I wasn't alone." Masked attackers stormed through shattered entrances, forcing terrified guests toward the exits. Their objective became obvious almost immediately. They weren't robbing the gala. They were searching for Elena. "Take her alive." Damien drew Elena behind a marble pillar as security teams evacuated civilians through reinforced passages. The grand ballroom transformed into chaos. Glass rained from the ceiling. Tables overturned. Panicked guests fled in every direction. Marco disappeared into the confusion. A group of attackers cornered Elena near the eastern gallery. One seized her wrist. Another raised a weapon. Damien fought desperately through the crowd, but too many people stood between them. For a terrifying moment, Elena stood alone. Then she noticed a digital tablet hanging from the attack leader's shoulder. Shipping manifests. Encrypted payment confirmations. The same accounting software she had analyzed only hours earlier. Without hesitation, she grabbed the device and activated its emergency synchronization. Every hidden transaction uploaded automatically to multiple secure government oversight servers that monitored international financial crimes. The attackers realized what she had done. No. One reached for the tablet. Too late. The upload completed. Their financial network was no longer hidden. Rage replaced discipline. The kidnappers abandoned every other objective. They dragged Elena toward a waiting armored van outside the estate. Damien broke through the last line of attackers just as the vehicle doors slammed shut. "Elena." Their eyes met through the reinforced glass. She placed one trembling hand against the window. He reached toward her. But the van accelerated into the darkness before he could touch her. The convoy vanished beyond the estate gates. Smoke drifted across the ruined entrance. Emergency lights painted the night in flashing red. Damien stood motionless in the middle of the wreckage, staring at the empty road. For the first time in years, the man who feared nothing looked completely powerless. And somewhere inside the speeding vehicle, Elena clutched the platinum bracelet engraved with "Never Shrink Yourself," wondering if she would ever see him again. The warehouse overlooking the abandoned harbor smelled of salt, rust, and smoke. Elena sat with her wrists bound to a steel chair, the platinum bracelet Damien had given her still resting against her skin. Her captors had failed to notice it beneath the torn sleeve of her gown. Marco Bellini stepped from the shadows, his expensive suit immaculate despite the chaos he had unleashed. "You always were the smartest person in the room," he said. "That's why you had to disappear." Elena met his gaze without flinching. He smiled. You're wondering why you're still alive. She remained silent. Because the evidence you uploaded wasn't everything. There are backup encryption keys and only someone with your expertise can recover them. He slid a laptop onto the table. Help me. She slowly shook her head. I'd rather lose everything. Marco sighed. So be it. Outside, engines echoed through the harbor. Black vehicles surrounded the building from every direction, but they kept their distance. Damien had arrived. He stepped from the lead SUV alone, ignoring every warning from his security chief. A loudspeaker crackled. Marco. His voice rolled across the empty docks. This ends tonight. Marco laughed from an upper window. It already has. Inside, Elena noticed something her captors had overlooked. The laptop displayed the same financial platform she had studied for weeks. Someone had logged into the hidden accounts without disconnecting the remote synchronization. Carefully, using only her fingertips, she shifted the keyboard closer. Every keystroke had to count. She wasn't trying to steal money. She was preserving evidence. Quietly, she activated an automatic mirror upload to international financial crimes investigators, ensuring every remaining record would be preserved before anyone could erase it. A green notification appeared. Evidence secured. She allowed herself one small breath. Outside, negotiations collapsed. Gunfire erupted. Damien's security team advanced only to create an evacuation route for the hostages trapped inside the warehouse. Smoke grenades filled the corridors, reducing visibility. Panic spread among Marco's hired gunmen. Their careful plan dissolved into confusion. Marco realized too late that the evidence was gone forever. You, he shouted, turning toward Elena. He raised his weapon. Before he could fire, Damien burst through the office doorway. He threw himself between Elena and the shot. The bullet struck a steel beam, showering sparks across the room. The two men struggled violently as the weapon skidded across the floor. Marco reached for a concealed knife. Damien blocked the attack, but the distraction gave Elena the opening she needed. Still bound to the chair, she kicked the laptop hard across the floor. It crashed into the emergency fire control panel. Automatic sprinklers activated. The room filled with water. Electrical locks released throughout the warehouse. Every hostage door unlocked simultaneously. People poured into the evacuation corridors. Marco stared in disbelief. You ruined everything. No, Elena said, her voice stronger than it had been in weeks. You did. Sirens wailed outside. Law enforcement officers, already alerted by the uploaded evidence, surrounded the harbor. Marco looked toward the exits. There was nowhere left to run. One by one, his remaining accomplices surrendered. The conspiracy that had hidden behind corporations, charities, and false respectability collapsed under the weight of its own records. Days later, the harbor attack dominated international headlines. The financial network was dismantled. Corrupt executives were arrested. Victims of the trafficking operation finally received justice. For the first time in years, Elena slept without fear. Several months later, the sun rose over the cliffs outside the restored Moretti estate. The atmosphere had changed completely. The private security remained, but the businesses connected to criminal activity had been shut down or turned over to lawful management under independent oversight. Damien stood beside the sea waiting for Elena. She approached wearing a simple ivory dress, her smile warmer than he had ever remembered. I spent years believing power could protect the people I loved, he said quietly. She took his hand. And? It couldn't. He looked directly into her eyes. But choosing you can. Emotion caught in her throat. I thought leaving you would save us. It almost destroyed us. He reached into his pocket and revealed a ring. Not extravagant. Not designed to impress the world. Designed to promise a future. You once walked away because you believed there wasn't a place for you beside me. He gently slipped the ring onto her finger. I was wrong to let you go. His voice softened. You never needed to become someone else. You never needed to make yourself smaller. You have always been brilliant, courageous, and beautiful exactly as you are. Tears filled Elena's eyes. I don't want a throne. He smiled. I'm not offering one. She tilted her head. I'm asking for a partner. With a joyful laugh through her tears, she answered, yes. Months later, they established the Hart Foundation for Financial Justice, helping victims of fraud rebuild their lives and training young forensic accountants to expose corruption with integrity and courage. Standing together before the foundation's new headquarters, Damien wrapped an arm around Elena's shoulders. The future they built wasn't founded on fear. It was built on trust, respect, and a love that neither violence nor betrayal could erase. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't defeating your enemies. It's finally finding the courage to choose each other. If this story touched your heart, let us know in the comments what your favorite moment was. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more cinematic romance stories filled with suspense, hope, and unforgettable love.